the OSAWards EU-funded project, and who better to talk about it than the project coordinator? So I'd like to call on Johan Lineker, who is working for RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden. His work focuses on how companies and public entities can use and collaborate on open source software and open data in a sustainable and value-creating manner. He's one of the founders and driving forces behind the Network for Open Source and Data, NOSAD, a network for public entities to meet and learn how to collaborate on open source software and open data. So, Johan, could you summarize what OSAWards is, what is it as an initiative, and what it's trying to achieve, and what success means for you?
Awesome. Thanks for the many questions. So, yeah, the open source OSAWards.eu project, so to say. So that's a Horizon funded project spanning 30 months that we just recently kicked off. And with this, we are really looking to create the awareness and recognition that open source deserves, but definitely requires. So open source is everywhere, both software and more hardware. And but it's that's one thing. The other thing is the people behind the open source technologies, building these technologies, contributing to their sustainability. Sustainability is a very great issue here. We need to improve the contribution, the adoption, the exploitation of open source, and this is really what this project is about. So we really want to highlight the potential and the actual use of open source software and hardware in Europe, both in terms of improving and enabling increased competitiveness for Europe, for its SMEs, improving skills development all across life skills and society. And as part of this, we are working on different building blocks. We as a consortium involve for example, Trust IT from Italy. We have RISE from Sweden. We have Technology from Spain. We have Barcelona Supercomputing also from Spain. We have APEL, the Association of SMEs in Europe in open source. So we are, and Fraunhofer from Germany. So we are a quite diverse consortia, all more or less objective or neutral in our ownership and so on, working towards really establishing this base for increased recognition. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about the different building blocks maybe. So, and one part here is really the academy, or the European Open Source Academy, which on the one hand is one way of increasing the recognition and efforts put in by key individuals in the larger ecosystem, but also gathering these people and the larger, becoming like a focal point for the larger community and ecosystem in generating discussions and inputs and guidance for society, for policymakers, for the larger OSIS ecosystem, and how we can improve the sustainability, how we can increase contributions, engagement, adoption of open source, both within industry, through SMEs, through increased skills development, especially from public sector, through procurement and collaboration across municipal borders and national borders, so definitely. And as part of moving on is also the awards here, which is a cornerstone in that we want to establish this annual award ceremony, again recognizing these individuals, but also increasing the awareness making and peer recognition for the great contributions that these people behind the technology actually does, and spanning broader, highlighting the FOSDEM week as this key part where we gather actors from across Europe and the world, not just within the open source ecosystem, but also those maybe outside or unknowingly being part of the ecosystem through the open source European Open Source Week, which is basically already there with FOSDEM and the different fringe events, but we want to formalize it and make it more attractable for people to come and join the conversations. And finally, coming out from the academy and through this project, we also want to, again, focus a lot on skills development, from both from the youth perspective, but also through the lifelong learning perspective, increasing the awareness and potential of using open source technologies and developing it, and also developing tools and metrics to enable both monitoring, a follow-up and planning for how open source both impacts society, but also the sustainability of it, hopefully, which can guide both the ecosystem, but also policymakers in the different interventions that they do and plan to help promote our use and the potential of open source in society. I think I'll hand it over to Nick from OFE to maybe talk a bit more on the academy.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we have, now that we've touched on the awards and the academy, we have indeed Nicholas Gates. He's the policy advisor at OFE, where he leads the work on the NGI, that's Next Generation Internet Commons Initiative, and supports its research, policy, and advocacy efforts. So what is the European Open Source Academy, and how does it seek to foster excellence in the European open source ecosystem?
Thank you, Rob. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Academy, and the Academy is really the engine of this Horizon Europe funded OSAWards project, but also the key to its sustainability long term. So what I want to reinforce today is that the open source awards are a kind of funded initiative right now, but over time they hope to become a self-sustaining effort. And key to doing that is the Academy. So the Academy is inspired by the world's leading academies of science. So think, for example, the Nobel Prize for Literature, or any of the Nobel Prizes for that matter. And the Academy is going to be key to bringing stakeholders and experts from the broader open source ecosystem into kind of the world of European policymaking and industry, and to really showcase how the two can collaborate and amplify open source as an engine of economic and social innovation. So that's really kind of the model. It's really to lift open source up and to showcase it as the best version of itself. And you know, if you're attending this webinar, we assume you're a firm believer in the value of open source technology and open source hardware for that matter. So what we're really hoping to do in the first year is to onboard kind of 4 awards recipients as the inaugural members of the Academy. So we'll be doing that at our inaugural awards ceremony on the 30th of January. But then we're hoping to expand to at least 10 persons in the first year. We kind of have a notional model in place, but what the Academy will be helping us to do is to kind of define kind of the processes for the Academy going forward, introduce a peer nomination process to enlarge the Academy, and then also setting the stage for what the awards look like next year, which for those tuning in this year will be very different next year. Because they'll be enlarged in scope and have a renewed focus and energy. And then what we're really trying to do is to use that initial kind of 2-year tenure of the 4 Academy members and the people that they are 4 Academy section heads and the people that they onboard to serve as the engine that propels us into 2027 and beyond, and to really kind of empower the next round of Academy members once they're onboarded in 2027 to continue promoting open source excellence and to be kind of the self-sustaining vehicle for the open source ecosystem. So that's kind of the vision, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And what we'll be doing over the next year or so with the Academy members is also doing kind of some of these webinars, kind of a media tour, trying to really engage the open source ecosystem and share out some of the insights and learning across key areas such as, for example, open source and AI, which we're here to talk about today. So it's really all about showcasing open source in its purest form and in its kind of most excellent form, and to honor those people who are contributing so much to the open source ecosystem. And that's kind of the goal of the Academy. So a key part of the Open Source Awards. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll respond to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So now that we've introduced the organizer of the webinar, the Academy and the OS Awards project, let's look at one of the intersections of open source and AI, specifically in the context of regulation. So I'm joined by Sebastian Reibel. He's the Director of EU Government Affairs at APEL. That's the European Open Source Software Association. He's a computer scientist that has worked as policy advisor on data protection, consumer rights, and digital policy in the European Parliament. Most recently, he was part of the Parliament's negotiating team for the Artificial Intelligence Act, the Product Liability Directive, and the Data Act. So, Sebastian, one of the ongoing debates is how to balance innovation with the need for regulation and ethical oversight in the open source community. Could you tell us more about how open source has come to be increasingly regulated in Europe through exemptions in critical legislations, and perhaps how that has led to open source exceptions in the EU AI Act in particular?
Thank you so much, Rob, for the introduction, and welcome to everyone once more. So I think everything has been said about APEL, the open source businesses in Europe. So let's dive right into your question. I think, in particular, the open source community understands that if you are being popular, then it is also your responsibility to act responsibly. Trust is something that you earn, and open source software and open source as a development model checks a couple of boxes by default. Transparency, check. Reproducibility, check. Learn and understand how the technology works that drives your car and indexes your photos, also check. The Commission's proposals in the last mandate, in particular the Product Liability Directive and the Cyber Resilience Act, have been unprecedented in how directly they address software producers in regulation. And open source is often invisible, but a huge part of the software infrastructure. So I think the European Commission should really start recognizing more, and that also goes for the legislators, the governments in Europe. They should recognize that open source software projects are in the common interest, and therefore it is in their interest to recognize and support the strategic importance of open source business models in Europe. Because ultimately they are so important to achieve that goal of technological sovereignty that we have given ourselves.
Thank you for that. Let's go a bit more into open source AI. So with us today is Kalen Osborne. He's a senior researcher at the Linux Foundation and a PhD candidate in social data science at the University of Oxford. At the Linux Foundation, Kalen leads research projects on various open source trends and policy topics with a focus on open source AI and funding. His PhD concerns the political economy of open source AI. He previously worked in AI policy at the UK government and was a UK government delegate at the OECD's Global Partnership on AI and the Council of Europe's Committee on AI. So, Kalen, we've seen a big coming together recently, in recent months, of the open source community, especially around the debate related to the definition of open source AI. So where have these discussions been heading? And what are the different ways in which open source AI has been defined?
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Greetings from Bogota. Yeah, good question. So, as many in the room are probably quite familiar, there has been a lot of debate in the last 2 years, and in particular in the last year. And this debate has been quite intense and oftentimes quite fierce about what is not, what should be, what should not be open source AI. And I think the important thing to note here is that these are not armchair discussions. The stakes are quite high. I can take two factors why it's important to get this definition right. The first is in the last 2 years we've seen a lot of open washing, and this concerns the use of restrictive licenses for model weights being released, or treating kind of model weights as open source, and so that there's limited transparency and kind of violation of open source principles. And the second, which is in my opinion more important, or more urgent, I should say, is the exceptions in the AI Act, which you mentioned earlier and Sebastian touched on. The AI Act has limited exemptions for AI systems and AI models released under free and open source licenses. So we need to figure out, okay, what are the components of models that are being shared and what licenses need to be used for them. We haven't really reached consensus as a community yet. We have a variety of proposals, which give us a good foundation for making progress. And I think it's really urgent that we make more progress. And we don't really have time here to go into the weeds of them, but you can understand them as two different approaches. One is looking, taking gradient approaches, and the other is taking binary approaches. So let's start with binary. So the Open Source Initiative last year released the V1 of the open source AI definition, and drawing on their kind of binary definition of what is open source software, they sought to define in a binary fashion open source AI systems. That has received support, but also backlash for various reasons, which we can maybe go into in the discussion. And the other approach is the gradient approach. So we have Irene Soliman from Hugging Face, who has proposed a gradient approach to AI systems from fully closed to fully open regards to access. And then there's also the model openness framework, which I am a co-author of, which is a gradient or sliding scale classification system for the openness and completeness of machine learning models. And I think, personally biased, but the usefulness of this approach, for example, for compliance with the exemptions in the AI Act, is that we break down models into 16 components, code, data, and documentation components, and recommend appropriate licenses. And the big question for us is, we know what licenses are appropriate for software, for data, for documentation, but what about weights? And we haven't really figured this out as a community, so I hope we can make some progress in the next year.
Okay, follow-up question. Why is open source AI relevant for thinking about European digital sovereignty and competitiveness?
Okay, that's a very big question. So there are some simple facts, right? So one is we know that AI technologies are having an ever-increasing impact in our daily lives. And we also know when we look at the global AI industry, or the global supply chain of AI technologies, that industry leaders at various layers of the AI stack or various stages of the supply chain are not based in Europe, and that creates some challenges for European sovereignty and competitiveness in the AI industry. But we also know that Europe is home to some of the best universities and research centers in AI research and development. So there's a lot of potential. And I think open source AI can come in and offers promise as a way of providing access to technology, as a mode of knowledge transfer and learning skills, as a way of openly developing technologies. And by technologies here, I don't mean just models, but also software as well as data sets. And also, really importantly, as a mode of governing the AI technologies, which are having more and more of an impact on our daily lives. But I think we also have to be realistic, right? We need to consider the configuration or the power structure of this global AI supply chain or the AI stack, and recognize that contemporary AI development is extremely compute intensive. And when you look at the kind of material dependencies, looking at accelerators or chips, and one company, NVIDIA, has a near monopoly, estimated between 70 to 80% of market share. Then if you look at cloud compute infrastructure, you have 3 cloud hyperscalers dominating that market. So when we think about trying to increase our digital sovereignty or competitiveness through investing or encouraging open source AI progress in Europe, we need to consider those material dependencies. So I don't want to finish on a negative note. So maybe just share some areas where I'm quite optimistic and where I think we can increase our competitiveness and digital sovereignty. Well, one is facilitate, not trying to compete necessarily with these cloud hyperscalers, but still fostering competitive domestic cloud industry, and building on existing initiatives, such as providing access to high performance computers for research labs, but also for SMEs and startups. This is a good way to go forward. Second is, I'm excited about public funding initiatives for open source software for machine learning AI, coming from the STF in Germany, funding the Pi data stack, as well as the French government funding scikit-learn, as well as the French government subsidizing the development of, or the use of supercomputers for community-led initiatives like the Big Science Project. So that's exciting. And then the last thing I'm excited about is this growing momentum for developing small models, which are more specialized, more affordable to develop, and also more green, which is in line with the green agenda. And so I hope that the European open source community can make progress on those three things in the next year or next few years.
Thank you. So continuing now on this track of opportunities in the future, and now that we've established the relevance, indeed, of open source AI. So we invite Sachiko Muto. She's the chair of Open Forum Europe, a nonprofit think tank promoting the merits of openness in computing to policymakers and communities across Europe. She's also a senior researcher at RISE Research Institute of Sweden. So, Sachiko, there's a lot that is changing quite rapidly in how Europe understands and positions itself on AI. Which we've seen through recent discussions around Eurostack and other initiatives. What do you think Europe will do next when it comes to regulating AI, and how that will impact the open source community, and what types of narratives will it be framed through, you think?
Okay, that's an extensive question. I just first want to say that I'm excited about the project that has kicked off last year, as Johan, my colleague, mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. And this is, the first external event that we're organizing. So I'm excited to be part of that as well. So to your question, obviously AI is the understanding of AI is rapidly, it's changing rapidly, as you said. I think also the understanding among policymakers about the role that open source can play in this, that's also changing. I've, since the beginning of this discussion around open source AI in the context of the AI Act, I've always made the argument that, the exemption for open source in the AI Act was not based on an understanding of the full impact of open source in sort of innovative technologies, but rather, and possibly paradoxically, because it was based on a sort of limited understanding of the impact of open source. And so the engagement of the open source community, both in the sort of the policy discussions around the Cyber Resilience Act and also the AI Act, I think has helped to open the eyes of Brussels policymakers on the true impact of open source and on innovation in general. And so I think you're talking about narratives in Brussels. Obviously, what we'll see in terms of continuing legislative activity, it's going to continue to be framed in the context of digital sovereignty, competitiveness, and also on the need to kind of preserve European or reflect European values, such as transparency, etc. And so I think, it's not about guessing what's going to happen next. I mean, to some extent, what will happen next is, we will see the implementation of the AI Act, and to some extent, the importance is going to be the devil's going to be in the details. We'll need to continue to engage in the development of technical standards. Technical standards are going to define define the concrete ways in which some of these legal requirements that are embodied in the text, how they are going to be implemented, or how you can show compliance with those legal requirements. So that's really important lesson, I think, for the open source community, is the need to stay engaged continuously in the Brussels policymaking space, because often, and this is something that I've often said in the past, if you come in at the stage where it's the discussion is being sort of held in the European Parliament, a lot of the understanding or the the basic framing of things it's already fixed, and so we'll end up sort of debating on details, but not in sort of the basic understanding of how, for example, open source, the role that open source plays, and you'll never have a true reflection of sort of or understanding of how the open source business model contributes to innovation. So this need to stay continuously involved, I think, is very important in the implementation of the AI Act, in the development of technical standards. It's also important to keep in mind other legislative proposals, for example, or enacted legislation. And I'm thinking then about sort of the Interoperable Europe Act, for example, and also upcoming revision of the Procurement Directive. If you think about it, the public sector is very interested in AI and will, be procuring AI systems. And so I'm sure, even if the focus is not specifically on AI or innovation or even on open source, the open source community and the open source development model is going to be impacted by some of these other legislation. So, continuous involvement is important.
Thank you, Sachiko. So now we go into the panel discussion, and I invite the rest of the speaker panelists a while ago to please join us back on the digital stage as we go through some additional questions. So you can activate your cameras now. And then after this, we will give the microphone to the audience because we have some questions for you as well. Thank you all for joining me. Now, first question, what do we mean when we talk about responsible and trustworthy AI? And what does that even mean in a modern European policymaking context? So who'd like to offer first view? Any of our panelists would like to start?
Well, I'll jump in if okay. So I think there is still such a lot of debate, and there are so many questions in society as to the effects that AI has or may still have. I was recently talking with a teacher, and of course, he was talking about the use of large language models and the production of homework. But even if it's not about not learning and not really doing your homework, even if it's only used to creating summaries of the text that you are supposed to read. Imagine what issues that might produce in the long term with potentially biased models. So I think society and consumers are really asking for technology that they can trust, and that is actually something that's beneficial for producers to have. And trustworthy AI just makes for better products. So yeah, as I said before, I think with open source, you check a lot of these boxes and answer to a lot of these questions already.
I can go next. I was hesitating to sort of jump into coming up with a sort of definition on the fly, but I think what open source does is enable. I mean, I'm not saying it's not about saying that something is open source, then it's automatically leading to sort of trustworthy, digitally sovereign, and technologies or AI for that matter, but it's more about sort of what it enables. And I think that that's where some of the interest from policymakers in open source, it comes from that, the possibility of having just the basic transparency aspects that's sort of embodied in open source. I think it's more that it's an enabler of trustworthy AI. It's not that it automatically leads to it. Sorry, I'm kind of I'd forgot to turn off the ringer here.
No worries.
Kaylin, you seem to want to be jumping in.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to build on the points you made, focusing specifically on responsibility. In the last 5 years, we made a lot of progress with national governments and intergovernmental institutions coming up with guidance and regulation and charters for what constitutes responsible AI, and hard and soft regulation. But one aspect that has often been excluded, but is, I think, importantly getting more and more recognition, is the environmental responsibility that we have. And we know that the contemporary approach to AI development is extremely compute intensive, which requires a lot of electricity and a lot of water to power data centers, which are used to train models. But not only that, but for inference. Every time you use ChatGPT or whatever chatbot you use and prompt or ask it to answer a question, these data centers are operating and using a lot of electricity and water. And so I think we need to pay more attention to the environmental costs and how we can bring them down. And that also applies to open source AI. And there are some great initiatives on on Hugging Face Hub, for example, reporting kind of the green footprint or the carbon footprint of the models. But we still have a long way to go, and so I hope to see more environmental discussion as part of the wider responsible and trustworthy AI discussion.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for your views. So another question: why is open source collaboration important to the development of AI models in a modern European context? Anyone who'd like to start off with a
such wonderful questions, Rob. they are very good questions. It's just I'll give it a go. I think that I would like to contrast the approach of indeed engaging in open source collaboration and making strategic use, or how can I say, or strategically participating in open source collaboration versus only focusing on building European technologies from scratch. So it's something that I've talked about a lot, and that's actually something quite important to me, because I believe that digital sovereignty is important aim. But I am, not in favor of focusing specifically on funding the building of sort of European technologies that are separate from sort of what's going on at the global stage. So it's more about sort of understanding what technologies are important for Europe and ensuring that we have the capabilities and that we are engaging at the global level strategically in the development of those technologies. And there, I would like to say it's not just the governments and sort of public funding. I think I'm always trying to encourage European companies to understand the strategic importance of open source collaboration, and understanding that it's not just about the code and using the code. It's about engaging and understanding how one can, by strategically engaging, leveraging the open source, open source communities. And I think European companies are not always understanding the strategic importance of open source, still focusing on maybe cost-cutting parts of open source.
Thank you. Sebastian, you wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I think that from a regulatory perspective, it is so important that the EU understands that open source as a business model and open source as a development model can be used to make use of the market that we have. The IT market in particular in Europe is very much dominated by SMEs that are all over the place in all matter of different countries. At the same time, it is so important for administrations and for businesses to have people to talk to and to be able to talk directly with the developers of software they rely on, and that includes AI, that are close to them and that they can approach. So making use of the open source development model means I can give a task or a business procurement task to a company that is close to me, that can cooperate with other companies on the basis of the software being open source, on the basis that it's developed collaboratively. And I think that is something that as regulators, we make much too little use of. So also think of that perspective. Open source companies can cooperate while competing in the market.
Thank you. We also have Kaylin who'd like to share some thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. So I would expand open source collaboration to maybe open science collaboration, because and what it means for Europe, because open source AI is not just about software and models, but the kind of scarce resource is data. And as we saw, I'm not sure how many people have been following the debate about the death of scaling laws, or as much as me. But one of the big problems with pre-training of AI models is reaching a limit in kind of available data. And Europe is a diverse community of many different cultures and language communities. And I think open source collaboration or open science collaboration is an avenue for researchers, developers, universities, public research labs, companies to work together around the European continent to share, annotate, and develop data sets which can be used to develop AI models that are not only developed by, but also serve the European population. So I think that's something where, open source collaboration or open science collaboration could be quite promising.
Thank you. Just in the interest of time, so we have to move to the next question. So I need to recall more currently some of the latest developments nowadays. What are some of the current and most important contributions of open source to European digital sovereignty, particularly when viewed through the prism of AI development? So is there anything in particular that comes out at you? Anyone would like to start?
Happy to kick us off. So a research article I love to tell people about that was published in 2007 was published by 16 eminent machine learning researchers, and it was published in the Journal of Machine Learning Research. And the title of this article is "The Need for Machine Learning, Open Source Software for Machine Learning." And in this article, they talk about how little open source software there is, or open source implementations there were of machine learning algorithms, which was really creating a massive barrier to machine learning researchers and develop and progress in the field of machine learning and AI. And nowadays, if you look at GitHub, there are over 1 million AI tagged repositories. If you look at Hugging Face Hub, there are over 1 million models. There are over 300 or almost 300,000 data sets. So we've made massive progress here, and a lot of these contributions have come from Europe. The one that I like to highlight, because I'm a contributor to this community, is scikit-learn, which is started by researchers at INRIA, the French National Institute for Computer Science Research, and it's the most downloaded Python library for machine learning. And it's called the Swiss Army knife for machine learning by some. It's had over 1 billion downloads, and basically it's not possible to do machine learning without scikit-learn. And of course, there are other Python libraries that are essential to, and beyond Python, essential to AI and machine learning. But the contributions by these researchers at INRIA, as well as their global community of, I think, over 2,500 contributors, have really shone a light on what European talent can contribute through open source to AI.
Thanks, Kaylin. Actually, this question is quite good to, I think, also pose to the audience. So if you have something you'd like to share that you think is a good contribution of open source to European digital sovereignty, please share it in the chat. We'd like to read more about that as well. But are there any other panelists who'd like to share? Yes, Sachiko. Go ahead. Oh, you may need to unmute.
Yes.
Sorry.
Happy to have the audience come in if somebody has some specific example, because I'd like to change it a little bit, my answer to say more that I think what open source contributes with is, or kind of, let's say, the more awareness around open source is really that it offers this possibility of open strategic autonomy, that it's not just sort of binary, sort of either we just create all the technology ourselves here in Europe, we are self-sufficient, let's say, or we have to just give up and say we can't compete because it's you know, we can't compete against US and China, is just give up and let's just you know, accept the status quo where, you know, we have a cloud market that's dominated by US hyperscalers. I think it's really about sort of understanding that there is a kind of a middle way, let's say, but it needs to be pursued strategically, as I said in my previous answer. It offers an opportunity to, you know, to be independent through this kind of strengthening of capabilities in open technology. So that's, for me, is the kind of the potential.
Just so we give the audience a bit more time to you know, to ask some questions, I will leave the last question for the panel, the last prepared question for the panelists towards the end. I'll give the chance now for the audience to ask some questions, and I'd like to call on for now Anya Radonjic, Communication, Dissemination, and Outreach Specialist at Trust IT, who will help me navigate through some of the questions that have been posed in the chat. Anya, who do we have? What questions have we received so far that our panelists?
I see a lot of comments, and thank you all for engaging. But I think since we're doing this democratic way, I see that Gerardo has raised his hand, so maybe we let him ask the first question, and I'll go back through the chat and see who's next. So please,
Gerardo, we'll give you the floor now. Yes, please introduce yourself, by the way, before you ask.
Hi, first of all, thank you for this event and to all the speakers. It has been very interesting so far. So, well, some of you might know me already. So I'm the chair of the Business Open Source Trade Association here in Portugal, and also a member of the Linux Foundation and Apple and Open for Europe. And I've been quite involved in all, and I mean all, AI working groups on standardization and risk management and responsible usage. And this has been quite a long time trying to link up all those groups. And I mean that there's quite a need for the participation of more people in different kinds of the ecosystem in all these different groups. So from the FINOS, the OWASPs, the OpenSSF, the IEEEs, and many others that are really working on several different aspects of all of this. One of the aspects, and it was a question from Lucas Huber, was about mixing components. And the thing that is most prevalent in the discussions I've been a part of is the problems of assuring provenance, compliance in terms of provenance, in terms of rights of usage, in terms of security and what is now called safeguards or guardrails in all of these models. And this is particularly intense when you start talking about the open source components, because now we have the need not only to ensure all of this, but also to show all of this, as it's one of the first tenets of the one of the important tenets of the open source, which is to be open, which is a little bit against the general practice in this industry. And so I don't know if this has been worrying the panelists. For me, it's being worrying because the latest open washing movements that we've seen are all about closing and avoiding disclosure.
Any comments from the panelists? Maybe you'd like to comment on some of the concerns that Gerardo has shared. This is a shared view as well among you.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thank you, Gerardo. No, I certainly agree and with your view. I think regarding security or safety, with the limited kind of openness of many of the key components that are used to train models, it is hard to ensure or guarantee or even fix, say, like the insecurity of, so ensure or guarantee the security and safety, or modify or fix the insecurity of models. And often I hear people quote, Linus's law from open source software in the context of open source AI models, which is only true to a limited extent, right? Like, if you're using models in practice and you observe hallucinations or any kind of undesired behaviors that you want to change, you can opt to fine-tune this model, but you can't really go to the roots of the model, especially if for example, the training data is not shared, or the code that's used in the pre-training phases, or even in the kind of post-training and alignment phases. So this is a major challenge, but there are a few examples of kind of what I would call like open science AI approaches by Luther AI and Big Code Project, which are releasing not just models, but the training data sets and all the code used to develop the models. So there are some good examples which maybe need more attention or visibility to really promote those good practices, which will be conducive to facilitating more safety and security work in the future.
Okay, thank you, Kaylin. So to go back to the chat, I'm going to connect these as two questions, so feel free to address either of them. One would be, how can we address the gender gap within the open source community in Europe and globally? And the second one is from Lucas, which is about, could you please elaborate how open models, weights, and permissive licenses, like DeepSeek version 3, with closed actors could be multi-edged swords? So I think these are the two questions we can start with.
Okay. Closing the gender gap. Maybe who would like to offer an opinion? The panelists? Oh, Sachiko, sorry, you're muted. Oh, Sachiko, you need your mic.
Yes, I was going to say that Sebastian and I quickly lowered our hands. I think we had our hands open. Oh, sorry, raised to answer Gerardo's question. So I don't know if I could come in quickly on that while I think also a little bit about the question. Just to say that I share like the concerns around open washing, and I think this is something that's not going to go away. I think it's kind of in a way natural that the more interest there is in openness or open source, and also requirements around that there's also going to be more open washing. And particularly if you think about procurement, if there are requirements or interest in open, there is going to be, on the supplier, from the supplier side, kind of a pressure to also market products and services as open. So this is going to be ongoing, and I think the answer, it's not going to be solved, but always more education, more having more informed people also in the public sector, for example, procuring authorities, just engaging in education and sort of awareness raising. So that was my comment on the open washing. Sebastian, I don't know if you wanted to also answer that, and I'll think about closing the gender gap, which I think is an important question, because there's not just in general we talk about a gender gap in tech, but actually, and unfortunately, I think this is even more the case in open source, actually, even compared to the tech industry in general. And it's a concern that I have, and I don't have a ready answer actually to this. But I think, actually one answer to this is I see in widening discussion around tech and open source, for example, when we start talking about not just the technology, but the uses of the technology. So, for example, I'm involved in this sort of open source for good and tech for good discussions. And I think research shows that when you widen the discussion of tech so that it also includes discussion on what the tech is for, you also attract other participants. And then there's also this movement that you've seen in some of the open source communities recently, which is about sort of also highlighting and promoting non-tech contribution to open source. I think that's also part of sort of creating a more welcoming environment to all sorts of contributions. So those are maybe two ways to address this question.
Thank you. Okay, I see Kaylin has a hand raised, and then Sebastian, if you want to intervene after, yeah. So Kaylin first, then we'll go to Sebastian.
Yeah, so on the representation or gender gap, this is, as we know, a major problem in the software industry. And I agree with Sachiko that this is actually worse in open source, according to studies. And I just want to give a shout out to Pi Ladies, which is a great community that organize workshops and meetups for women, but also non-binary people, and they're all around the world. I'll just paste in the public chat all the different locations where they are. And if you're interested in getting involved, I recommend reaching out to local organizers and yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, I could just
Sebastian?
come in with
Yeah.
one quick thing. Sorry, just
Go ahead,
one quick thing, because I know
yeah,
there's
go
a
ahead.
finding. I think there was a Eclipse Foundation that did some research on open source in the global south, and they found, interestingly enough, that in some of those countries, open source is attracting more women. Because it's seen as having a lower barrier for entry. So I think that could be interesting to also look at what we can learn from the global south, which is not something that we often do, I think. So.
Thanks for that perspective, Sachiko. Sebastian, over to you.
All right. So just to round it up, I will also say that it is also part of our work in the OSAWards project that we're trying to make these spaces more inclusive and make them safer for women and other genders, but in particular women. Because I fundamentally believe that is also in the interest of the businesses that I represent, but also in the interest of society to make spaces more inclusive and safe. But if I may come back to the issue that was touched before by Gerardo, I think it's and I want to make this point also because I see that there are some colleagues even from the European Commission that are connected. That one thing that I encounter a lot with businesses and open source developers, in particular in this innovative AI space, is that they say they don't get the financing once they mention that they are doing open source. So investors seem to shy away much too often. And I'm wondering, since Dimitrios has put it in the chat that the Commission is working on the Cloud and AI Development Act, I wonder if this proposal is going to address also this question of how to attract more investment, how to make it easier. I mean, potentially that is also something that could find its way into the public procurement reform. But I think these are questions that directly address the needs of the business ecosystem developing open source innovative products, including AI.
Thank you. Okay, we are running very close to the time duration of this webinar. Before we close with some takeaways, I wanted to give the audience some chance to give us some feedback. And so this next question is really for you. If you have an answer to this, do raise your hand. We'd like to give at least one or two of you some airtime to respond. So the question for the audience is, how can open source be utilized better by those looking to build responsible and trustworthy AI? So again, I repeat, how can open source be utilized better by those looking to build responsible and trustworthy AI? Is there anyone who'd like to? Okay, Gerardo, you have a hand raised. I'm not sure if you speak yet. If so, please go ahead.
Oh,
Otherwise,
you
we may
should
have to. Yes,
you
that
should
works.
give
Yes.
the microphone to someone else before me. Yeah, because I tend to talk a lot about the mic. I'm just going to bridge something that Sachiko has mentioned before, and it's also something that related to one of the questions that has just surfaced about the export restrictions from US about AI technologies. Because open source creates such a level playing field for everyone, because there is no barrier to entry, because we have a full commitment from everybody to disclose their knowledge and to share their work and concerns. This is the way to construct really what we can say some reliance and some assurance into the user of the technology. And for instance, one of the discussions that in the Finos groups about AI they have been dealing with is the risk impact and all the notions of security are better managed under an open source view, which is we have, besides the many eyes approach, the fact that we can more or less make accountable all of those actors that are involved in this makes it for a better business proposal into the user, because now he can be assured of the quality of the project model that he's been using, and he can construct on top of it, let us say, in the case of an entity that's commercializing that model, he can construct all its spaces in terms of the security and how to deal with issues through a very clear pattern, which has to be ensured. I think there's a little question that sometimes we miss when dealing with AI. This is no longer a software project, a software product. It's something much larger, and so every little issue that we have can actually have a bigger impact on either upstream and downstream. That is, you are now responsible for the issues you find because they can impact all the users that are dealing with this, but also all the developers that are using this. And so this actually integrates the user and the business community in much tighter ways than just a question of a transactional use. And that is one of the great things here. So because no longer is the knowledge the base of the leverage, it's the people. And it's what open source allows, is to give people, give persons, the actual persons, the knowledge and the way to do this. And where the business is going to strive is when they have better people. Technology, the knowledge is no longer the leverage. the leverage is people. And this is the thing that we must take into account, that to deal with AI, we need more people, not less.
Thank you for your views, Gerardo. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. So I pass the floor now to Anya, who will just give us a quick wrap up of the main takeaways from today, and then we'll close. So,
thank you, Rob. I hope you can all see my screen. I'll quickly just do a mini presentation, but I think I would like us all to kind of take what Gerardo just said, which is it's all about the people in OS, and it's definitely been a theme throughout our discussion today. So what we've gone through is basically presenting the EOSA and what are our plans for the future. As you can see, what are the areas we're planning to tackle, and how do we plan to expand in the upcoming years. We also touched upon legislations in Europe through cyber resilience and AI acts, and how are they actually impacting and addressing open source. We've seen that there's a lot of contestation about how is open source defined, and the open source AI, how is it defined and regulated, and where is it actually being addressed throughout these discussions. I also particularly enjoyed mentioning the environmental responsibility for the open source AI. So thank you, Kaelan, for raising these points. And also, how can we actually strategically enable further development of open source within Europe, rather than it being exclusionary, but to reflect the latest patterns. So thank you, Sachiko, for kind of raising that point about being strategic in the future developments of open source technologies. Anyways, I know we're running out of time, so Rob, I will give you the joy of announcing some of our future events. This is our first of all, our only webinar for January, but we're hoping to have some more webinars and discussions in plan. So without further ado, Rob, what is our next event? Where can you find Open Source Awards and Academy next?
thank you. So indeed, we will have some follow-up webinars. So this isn't the last. So be sure to follow all our channels, because that's where we will announce it. Do subscribe to our newsletter, so that you can receive invitations to our next events. Our next immediate one is in fact on the 30th, at the end of this month. So we have the European Open Source Awards, the ones that have been described earlier at the beginning of this webinar. So this will be in Brussels, Belgium. I think some of you in today's event are going to be there, so do say hi to us if you see us there. It would be nice to meet you in person. But if you are going to be missing this one, do know that we have another one, of course. We have one every year, so do watch out for the 2026 one. And with that, I think we will close now. Again, the recording and the slides, if there were shown any of these slides, they will be published within the span of a week. But on behalf of all the panelists, the speakers, and on behalf of the European Open Source Academy and the OS Awards project, thank you very much for joining us. And it was very nice interacting with you in this first engagement with the public. Looking forward to engaging with you more in our next events. Thank you all, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.